Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Excellus Blue Cross Blue Shield with a mission to address health inequities by building up communities and breaking down health barriers. Excellus Blue Cross Blue Shield, everybody benefits. More at excellusbcbs.com.
For WXXI News, this is Connections. I'm Raquel Stephen in for Evan Dawson. Today, we're talking about a disease that changed the world and the scientists who have spent decades trying to stop it, HIV/AIDS. It's a field where research has saved millions of lives, but now major federal funding cuts could put that progress at risk. According to the Kaiser Family Foundation, the 2026 federal budget proposal slashes HIV-related funding by more than $1 billion. And cuts to the National Institutes of Health could hit vaccine and treatment research especially hard. What could these cuts mean for research underway right here in Rochester? What's at stake for prevention, treatment, and global health? And most importantly, what does this mean for the people in our city, in our area, who are living with HIV/AIDS right now? We've got two guests in studio who can help us understand the science, the stakes, and the future of HIV research. Dr. Michael Kiefer is with the University of Rochester Medical Center. He leads the Rochester Victory Alliance, a national HIV vaccine research clinic funded by the NIH. Thank you for coming, Dr. Kiefer.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. And we have Dr. Harold Smith. He's the founder and CEO of Oyogen, a Rochester-based biotech company developing new HIV vaccines. He's also emeritus professor of biochemistry at the University of Rochester Medical Center. Thank you for joining us.
Me. Yeah, pleasure.
Thank you. So, fellas, gentlemen, doctors, Dr. Kiefer, can you tell us about the work you do at the Rochester Victory Alliance and tell us about this organization?
Sure. Just to start with, I should explain that we do the clinical research, meaning testing new medicines and vaccines, preventive vaccines in people. We've been doing this since the beginning of these programs in 1987, and actually I came to Rochester for my training in 1987, so I've sort of been with it the whole time. We've kind of branded it as Rochester Victory Alliance with the help of our community input. It does really reflect mostly the vaccine research because we generally recruit volunteers from the general public. Again, it's prevention, so people that are healthy and normal, and we test vaccines in them. And we have a pretty robust community outreach program. More recently, we've kind of combined our treatment research. So the RVA really tells about the both sides of the treatment research as well as the vaccine research. And in both cases, we're one of around 30 to 40 sites around the world and maybe 20 or so in the U.S. That do these trials under the leadership of the NIH and leadership networks that are located at different academic institutions.
Yeah. And Dr. Kiefer, I just want to say this. I wanted to do this topic, right? Because I know Rochester has a very strong history of HIV/AIDS prevention, treatment, and research. And a lot of us don't really know of Rochester's history, especially with the vaccines. Can you take us back and tell us when did it start and how far we've come when it comes to vaccine creation?
Sure. Well, the reason I came to Rochester is because back in the mid-'80s, we were known for testing new antivirals and viral vaccines. I basically came here wanting to study flu, and then HIV kind of happened at the same time. So these networks started back in, I don't know, 50s, 60s or something like that. But then when AIDS came along, Anthony Fauci reorganized it into these different priority networks. So treatment, vaccine prevention, other forms of prevention, mother and child treatments. And we've been a part of this since the very beginning. Basically, I owe my position to those before me that were leading the program. And when I started, I was fresh out of training.
Yeah. Yeah. And Dr. Smith,
Yes.
Oyagen.
Yes.
Let's talk. Can we talk about the name first? 'Cause I know there's a strong tie right here with this name Oyagen. What does that mean?
Well, when I was looking for names for a company when I founded it, I was looking for something that would represent the kind of treatments for HIV that we're hoping to achieve, and that is a change, significant change. And what came across is a mythological person called Oya, and Oya is the goddess of change. And all around from the South Hemisphere, South Africa and South America, Oya is called the winds. It brings children into your life, brings stress into your life. She's kind of a trickster in a way. But she is always shown as a sweeping hand over a field of wheat, causing the change that's necessary.
Yeah. So can you tell us about Oyagen and what have you, what does your research entail and what have you done thus far?
So, like Dr. Kiefer, I came to the University of Rochester in the 80s, 1986. I thought I was going to do cancer research. And as it turned out, one of the discoveries my lab made was that everybody has an ability to fight infectious diseases, but usually the virus knows how to handle that, so it tackles our defense, takes it out, and then the virus inserts itself. And so one of the things I had been working on was the what are called host defense factors. And that led me first from cardiovascular disease and cancer, and then all of a sudden we realized that 4 of these host defense factors were the sentinels to try to prevent HIV. But why is HIV still a phenomenon, a medical threat? And it was because the virus has encoded in itself the ability to tackle the host defense, take it out entirely, and then, more or less sneak into the system. So I decided that I was going to dedicate my research effort, and in 3 years I transitioned from heart disease into HIV, totally transformed my lab. My lab's a federally funded lab at the University of Rochester, and my discoveries were there. And one day the university asked me, would I be interested in moving my endeavors, not out of the university, but into a company as well. And after thinking about it for a little while, because I'm an academic at heart, right? So starting a company is not my business model, so to speak. It was really interesting how much discovery process there was and how big the need was. And that was calling me.
Yeah. Can we explain to our listeners why is it why is the HIV virus so complicated? Why is it taking us this long to find treatment or to develop a vaccine?
It's basically a master of disguise. It changes the way it looks. It is a lot of sugar coating on the top of this virus that kind of hides the places where the key needs to go in to be able to stop transmission. I think the viral diversity is through the world is really the number one issue. We all went through the COVID pandemic, and that changed from time to time because remember, we had to get new vaccines with new strains, but it changes much more slowly and predictably than HIV. HIV, out of control HIV within a single person changes, and so it's more like a swarm of virus that people have when they're not being treated. When they're being treated, then it's tamped down and really undetectable in the blood.
So, Dr. Kiefer, how close are we to developing this vaccine?
Okay. Well, there's 2 kinds of vaccines. So there's active vaccination where you're actually giving the vaccine. This is the one we usually think of. You give the vaccine, your cells or your body makes the protein, or it could be a protein that you're administering. And your body then creates an immune response to that. That has been very, very difficult for the same reason COVID kept changing, HIV kept changing, to really pin down the exact antibodies that you need have been very difficult. We are making progress on that, and I can talk a little bit about that too. But the other form of vaccination is passive immunization. So get preformed antibodies and give them to people so you don't have to make them yourself with the active vaccination. And probably one of the biggest scientific advances on the prevention side has been the recognition that a number of people with uncontrolled HIV, as their virus mutates, their immune system's trying to catch up to it. And at times, it develops actually really effective antibodies that can neutralize all different strains. And that was really kind of recognized much after all the medicines came along and that sort of thing. And we now have monoclonal antibodies that have been shown to protect against transmission of viruses that are sensitive to that antibody. It looks like we're going to probably use combination of three monoclonal antibodies to kind of cover most of the strains that people would run into. And so this is really a form of long-acting PrEP, or pre-exposure prophylaxis. You'd get probably an IV infusion every 6 months or perhaps every 4 months, but something like that. And you might ask, why is it any better than really long-acting PrEP that you can do with medicines now? And just basically receiving antibodies have less side effects, less long-term adverse effects, and also it may still be more expensive than we hope. We do know the medicines are quite expensive. It remains to be seen exactly how economical really these broadly neutralizing antibodies are, but that's where we're at right now. With the passive immunization, we're on the verge of having a product. Active vaccination, we're still digging down into how to get the immune system to do this.
Okay, so it's passive and active.
Yeah.
Form of vaccine.
Yeah.
Okay.
So preformed antibodies and passive, and then just have your body make the antibodies.
And I know you mentioned PrEP.
Yeah.
Can we talk about PrEP and,
Sure.
and what PrEP is and what are the benefits of PrEP?
Sure. PrEP is really kind of a breakthrough. A couple of major breakthroughs on the treatment side were, one, if you are on medicine and your virus is undetectable, you do not transmit the virus. So that's why it's important for people to get on medicines and stay on them. Secondarily, if you can take one of the HIV medicines, actually a combination of two, before you're exposed, HIV doesn't transmit or can't take hold. So there's daily PrEP, pills people take every day. You can sometimes modify that and take it kind of when you expect perhaps more chances of exposure. And then there's long-acting now intravenous PrEP that it can, actually lenacapavir is the breakthrough kind of medicine of the year for per Science magazine. And that is nearly 100% effective if given intravenously every 6 months. The trouble is almost half the people who get infected don't really realize they're at risk for infection. Mm-hmm. So, to take these preemptive medicines, you've got to understand there's some risk there. And so there'd still be a large portion of people who wouldn't really realize that they're being exposed in one way or another.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Kiefer. Dr. Smith, I know your approach is a bit different, more therapeutic, right? What exactly are the drugs you're developing designed to do?
Right. So I just want to make a correction that the company's not really focused on vaccines in the way that Dr. Kiefer has mentioned. We're focused on drugs that can be taken orally. And while the company started out in understanding what HIV does to these host defense factors, so it makes a molecule that goes after our host defense factors and actually destroys them. They're gone. And so how can you block that? And the company was formed on the initial evidence in the labs that we could actually stop this protein. It's called viral infectivity factor, or VIF. And we could actually stop VIF and rescue cells from an infection. You know, as pharma, the big pharmaceutical industries don't do much research anymore. They've realized that their money is coming from drugs that exist and reformulating and repackaging and stuff like that. So the responsibility for developing new drugs for pandemics falls to universities and small biotechs. And essentially, we live in what's called the valley of death, where how do you get the money to support staff and lab infrastructure and stuff like that. So I entered the valley of death in 2003 with a lot of chutzpah that I could probably do it. We are federally funded. I have received Bill and Melinda Gates funding for my work on HIV and investments. And so what we are looking for is a small molecule that has the ability to pair up with that VIF protein in some way and keep it away from our host defense factors and allow the body's natural defense to fight HIV. As time went on, the HIV drugs became 2 drugs, 3 drugs, 4 drugs, and then long-acting, and then PrEP became an issue, so you pre-exposure prophylaxis. And as I was watching that happen, the desire to fund new discoveries, new mechanisms of action, if you will, how to trick the virus in a different new way so that we'd be prepared for when it escaped, that became less of a passion for the industry. And the only place where that still remained as a passion is in National Institutes of Health. In other words, federally funded prevention, looking forwards to the future, supporting people coming up with stuff. And right now we have a molecule that was once and in some cases still used for cancer treatment, so it's already been safely administered to people. And what we've done is make it orally available and de-risk it so that it doesn't cause side effects. And what we're seeing in the first sense now is that mice that have been infected with HIV, and that's a whole experimental system, when taken off a therapy, their viruses rebound and come right back up in their bloodstream, and that's why continuing to take drugs is important. And what our drug does is prevent that rebound from happening. So I think Dr. Kiefer and his group are looking at prevention. What we're looking at is people who are carrying the virus to try to find some way of a functional cure, a true cure, so that they can stop taking medicines for the virus forever. And so that's a big pie in the sky. We've gotten our first data that the theory holds in mice. And so now we're moving forwards and going to have discussions with the FDA at how to bring that forward.
So is it safe to say, Dr. Kiefer, your focus is prevention, and Dr. Smith, yours is
Cure.
Cure.
Well, part of my a second hat I use is the treatment research, and that's major ultimate goal is cure as well too, and it's trying to eradicate that genetic material that's hiding in your cells. It's but functional cure actually is an important way to look at it. Meaning you do well, your immune system is intact, and you don't have to take antiretroviral medication. So now you have to take antiretrovirals. Functional cure can be achieved that way, or even with these combination of monoclonal antibodies. So those are kind of, and it's good to have parallel areas of research. Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
And combining those, because this is not a single silver bullet. As we learned coming through the 60s and 70s, that one drug is not enough to stop this virus. And so, I think it's very smart to try to tackle it with a vaccine therapy or passive immunity, and at the same time try to cure it so that you are tackling both ends of a patient's needs.
And I know part of the reason why that cuts were made, or cuts are being made to funding, is because there's a belief that we have enough information.
Yeah, I'd like to address that in a recent model called COVID.
I wish you guys could see the looks that you gave me.
Because, in 2001, we had SARS-1. And that emerged, and the curve flattened too fast. It's not that the pharmaceutical industry didn't respond by trying to make vaccines against the spike protein, but there was no market for it, so they dropped it. Then SARS-2 came along. Again, the curve flattened too fast. There was no money to be realized in that. And now we have COVID-19 that's struck, right? And, pharma's a hero now for coming in and making a vaccine for us, but they could have made it back in 2001. And they didn't because there was no economic incentive in that. And so this is a situation where I'm good now, but the virus doesn't see now. The virus looks at the future.
Yes.
And just as Dr. Kiefer was saying, just before our very eyes, COVID was mutating and outstripping some vaccines. Studies show that HIV can be controlled initially by your body, and then drug-resistant strains emerge. I mean, there was a study published in Kenya where they showed several times during a person's life, not treated with antiretrovirals, they were able to suppress the virus, but then the virus escaped that time after time after time. So it's wrong to assume that, is it safe? Is it safe out there? It's definitely not safe with a virus that makes mistakes. Mm-hmm. And those mistakes serve the virus's advantage. So always stay on your guard. We got into COVID-19 because we played the it's safe game. No one wants to relive the 60s and 70s where they were measuring time and human lives lost. No one can handle that anymore. So I think we need to be on our guard. The cuts, this is... Dr. Keefe and I can talk about this when you feel like it's appropriate, but we have put into place one of the largest programs for a single disease that anyone has ever done in the world, and that's called PEPFAR. And George W. Bush put that into place in 2003. It is a law enacted by Congress that we will go out, seek HIV, tuberculosis, and malaria, and we will preemptively control these diseases wherever they are in the world. Right? Brilliant, really. And to date, I think that's $120 billion have been spent that way since 2003, roughly $4 to $5 billion a year. And 60% of that money is administered through USAID and the CDC. So if those are not existing, all right, so they're talking about this will come up in 2025 for another $4.9 billion. Whether Congress passes it or not is of interest, but it already has a 39% cut in budget and a $1 billion reach into already people who have been promised or have money to pull that money back from other countries and things like that. So it's already looking very compromised. And as Dr. Kiefer was saying, if you let this virus make a copy of itself, it'll make copies wrong. Some of those wrong copies will kill the virus. Some of them will be neutral. Others will provide resistance to every drug we have on the planet. And if that happens, PrEP will fail, treatment will fail. I don't mean to be bearer of bad tides, but we really have to be on our toes when it comes to a virus. Yeah. It's too tricky. And even bacteria that have the ability to create drug resistance, we can't play around with that.
And Dr. Kiefer, do you have enough when it comes to vaccine trials? Do you have enough information, or do you need to do more?
No, we need to do a lot more. It's actually finally getting interesting because we know these broadly neutralizing antibodies exist, and we're really taking a different approach where we're looking at the various earliest initiation of the immune responses with the B cells, and our studies now often do blood draws through pheresis, where we can get millions and millions of cells to look for very rare B cells that have been targeting the right key. We do have a lot of helpful stuff, as far as PrEP and treatment goes, but you can never have enough of a virus that changes this much, and I would say that what worries me more than even just the suppression of HIV findings is across the waterfront. There are dozens of other viruses that threaten to mutate a little bit and become a big problem. We could relive the COVID pandemic, which would be a shame to not proactively be on top of that.
And I'm just playing devil's advocate here. You know, the HIV/AIDS virus is not what it used to be, right? People are living with this. They're living long, healthy lives, right?
Right.
That's
So-
qualified, though. Because if you
what
are
do you mean by
infected
that?
with HIV and you are at zero, and that's the big thing about what's your status? You're plus, but you're at zero, right? Even if you're living at a low or undetectable level of virus, your body knows it is infected, and there's an inflammatory response. You can't get rid of the problem that AIDS dementia, AIDS-related cancer, AIDS onset of metabolic diseases, and that looking at DNA markers, your genetic code, you can look at this in terms of aging. People who are living with HIV have up to 10 years of shortened lifespan because of the stress of having to deal with something like that and being on these strong medications. So, hey, I'm zero and life is good, but maybe not as long as you could be good, you know? And I think that's really kind of the pharma sell. We've got you. And yeah, you're at zero, but you're not cured. You know, it's all diseases, diabetes, you name it. It's like managing the disease with lifelong medications as opposed to doing something significant to change it.
So as far as the cuts, either of you, your organizations, your research, your work has been affected in what
yeah.
ways?
Mine's been affected. But you know, as news comes out kind of slowly, I mean, the biggest effect has been these kind of automatic cuts or stop, or you know, no longer sending grant funds to Harvard or Columbia, and they're all members of our network that we work with. Actually, this morning I watched the Senate's Appropriations Committee for the NIH, the whole hour and 53 minutes.
Almost as long as this.
And the Dr. Bhattacharya, the head of the NIH, made it clear again and again that this is a negotiation. I know we're just dumbfounded by 40% decrease in NCI, you know, different funding streams. He made it very clear that this is a negotiation. You know, Donald Trump tends to put on negotiation, and then you negotiate, and it's up to Congress though to really stand up to this. And throughout all history, the NIH has been perhaps the only thing that the two parties could agree on. George W. Bush has saved more lives than really any other president, probably.
I see you're agreeing, Dr. Smith.
Yeah, it's amazing. They are estimating that almost 8 million babies who could have contracted HIV, their lives have been saved by PEPFAR from Bush's program. And it's between 20 and 30 million lives have been saved. But PEPFAR doesn't just support drug distribution to people. It supports an infrastructure of education. It supports preventative programs. It also realizes that if a country is ravaged by Ebola, HIV, and you know, lack of clean water and famine, that country is subject to being taken over by militants. And so that's, of course, in our country's interest to make sure that countries behave sociably as countries do with one another, and that if a country is taken over and women don't have rights in those countries because of all these things, PEPFAR has targeted all these things as being important to support an infrastructure that allows people to get access to health care and live healthy lives and not get infected.
Yes.
And so if you pull that out, that's a problem. For a company like Oyogen, we actually were privileged enough to work directly with National Institutes of Allergenic and Infectious Diseases, and they were working with us, doing work with the company for essentially free. And then we were able to bring in about $8.6 million in federal grants to support the development of a treatment that could lead to a cure. So in my company, that's half our platform. The other half is Ebola and COVID. Half the platform now is essentially dead because we can't get federal money in a secure way. I would just say that going on a 90-day review period, you sure hope that everyone who has HIV in developing countries has a bottle full of pills, because waiting 90 days before you get your next shipment through USAID is going to devastate those people. Yeah. So that's to me a really major problem. As Dr. Kiefer and I were talking about, there is no money from the federal government to support the education of the next generation scientists and doctors who will be at the forefront of whatever breaks out with HIV again. We just won't have the resident knowledge. I mean, Mike and I are both aging. Yeah. Right? We've spent 20, 30 years or more doing this so that we, are flexible on our feet, so to speak, and intellectually and in the lab. And so we're seeing that students, we can't get support, control the number of students, control this, control that. The impact is not just now, it's people getting out of control in the disease and training the next generation to handle the medical issues.
So are you seeing that the next generation they're losing interest in this field?
Even if they have interest, we don't have the funding to support the stipends and the infrastructure. A student costs a certain amount of money, just salaries and benefits and stuff. But then there's the infrastructure that supports a student, the maintenance of the laboratory in a working condition, the reagents, the publication costs, and everything else that support a PhD graduating. Yes. And that's not there.
Yeah. And this is what funding
does. Yeah. And so we're all stressed out as educators, and we're stressed out as HIV researchers and doctors. I mean, it's enormous thing resting right now as to whether, PEPFAR is a law, and it's going to expire in March, and or has, and if it's not reappropriated, that part of treating people around the world and keeping them healthy and keeping diseases off our shores is compromised. Then already the cuts in the federal government on NIH grants. I mean, maybe, the medical center may suffer in a year $32 million loss of income because of these grants being pulled back. It is unimaginable how to come through that. And the private sector is not always reliable to step up. I mean, there are family offices that are dedicated towards these processes, and thank you very much for that. But the federal government is no longer a place to tap out for money. Bill and Melinda Gates are not supporting basic research in these disease areas. They're supporting societal support and education. Things are all very important, but our money can't come from there. So we're kind of looking at each other and wondering.
So there's no plan B?
Right now, until they decide whether there's any money, and then there'll be a mad scramble for picking up the dollars.
Yes.
To give you a feel for this, the AIDS was getting a lot of money through National Institutes of Allergenic Infectious Disease, and other institutes were having to share that money. And eventually got to the point that the studies for NIAID were being distributed in a way so that the National Cancer Institute, recognizing that there are AIDS-related cancers, okay, so that should be your responsibility. And the National Institute of Mental Health, NIM, okay, so you pay for that. And all of a sudden people were shoving off the bills from NIAID into other groups for, to review. And what you ended up with is in those reviews for mental disorders or in health or for cancer, the focus was on the disease itself, and HIV was an imposition into those study sections. So it was already tough getting funding that way. And this is just a slap in the face right now.
You're very passionate about this, Dr. Smith.
Oh, yeah. I want to be part of the change.
Yes.
Like, oh, yeah. Yeah.
To our listeners, if you have any questions for our guests, you can call 844-295-TALK. That's 8255. That's toll free. And our local number is 585-263-9994. Or you can email us at connections@wxxi.org or comment on the Connections live stream on the WXXI News YouTube channel. So we're going to take a quick little break. When we get back, we'll talk more about the state of HIV research and funding. Stay with us. It's Connections.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Mary Cariola Center, providing education and life skills solutions designed to empower individuals and the families of those with complex disabilities. Mary Cariola Center, transforming lives of people with disabilities. More at marycariola.org.
Congress is considering a rescissions package from the White House that would claw back more than $1 billion of public media funding. Federal funding for all of public media amounts to about $1.60 per person per year. That helps bring you the news, music, and podcasts you rely on from NPR. Please take a stand for public media stations like this one today at protectmypublicmedia.org.
We're back. This is Connections. I'm Raquel Stephen, filling in for Evan Dawson. And today we're talking about HIV funding and research and this threat to the funding. Joining me in studio are Dr. Michael Kiefer, is with the University of Rochester Medical Center and the Rochester Victory Alliance. And Dr. Harold Smith is the founder and CEO of Oyagen. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Dr. Kiefer, I want to talk about vaccine hesitancy, right? And how that may affect the work that you're doing with COVID-19. That has heightened a bit, right? Skeptics are out. Is that something that's affecting what you're doing as far as clinical trials with HIV vaccine?
Yes, of course, to some extent, but really not really. We're really still in the research phase and all that. Just personally, I just don't get vaccine skepticism at all. I was born in 1955. Polio was visible. We no longer had to deal with polio for a while. COVID came along, of course, and we saw what vaccines could do with that. The side effects from vaccines are self-limited for the most part, and rarely are they serious compared to the disease that they're being given for. There's not even a comparison about the impact, morbidity, mortality that can occur from different types of infections that are now completely preventable. And the thing is for this to work, you need to have herd immunity, meaning everybody needs to participate. So, so if half the people aren't participating, then who I really feel sorry for is the people who have kids with cancer or adults with cancer that don't respond to vaccines and are forced to sit in the same waiting room with a patient with a vaccine preventable illness because the person or parents decide they're not interested in the vaccination.
And we have a caller here. We have, I believe, Tim from Rochester. Tim, are you here with us?
Yes, I am.
Yes, you want to make a comment on the recuts to PEPFAR, correct?
Yes.
Yes, for Dr.
Thank
Smith.
you.
Yes, go right ahead.
Thanks very much. I find the program and the information really rich and very, very helpful. So just a comment first and then a question. Heard on a report on NPR recently that according to the PEPFAR impact tracker, that there have been 55,000 deaths already of adults and 6,000 children since the cuts a few months ago. So just to ground it in real-time impact, especially in developing countries and in poor countries. My question is twofold. One is, what would both doctors suggest to concerned citizens about the impact of PEPFAR cuts for people from a global health perspective? And secondly, I'm curious as to their thinking in regard to the development community generally globally and how it's responding to PEPFAR cuts vis-a-vis the funding of both treatment and education. So it's a two-part question. But again, thank you so much for this program.
Yes, thank
Great
you.
question.
Thank you, Tim. Yeah, great question, Dr.
Kiefer?
Dr. Kiefer.
Well, I'm sorry. Could you repeat that first part of the question? So,
Tim,
Sure. The first part of the question is simply, what can citizens do who are concerned about the 40% cut
oh,
in PEPFAR and its implications?
yeah.
both
Sorry,
locally and
sorry
globally.
about that. I got. Right now, everything hangs in the balance in Congress. It is so close. The majority is not very large. All of this, and again, George W. Bush started PEPFAR. All of this has been nonpartisan. I think right now the biggest impact can be made by writing congressmen and women, and in particular, if you're in a district that is red, not not blue. That I think that's the number one thing that you can do at the moment. I think it's fairly urgent right now, too, because these decisions are being made. And again, I think it's all in negotiation, and there's a chance to claw back some of this, but we'll see.
Yeah, this call to action to Congress, right, for
Yeah.
citizens to voice their concerns. This has been prominent now, right, especially in
Yeah.
the medical field.
Yeah.
Is it effective?
Well, all we need is 2 or 3. We'll see.
It's how the Trump regime handles things. PEPFAR is run out of the State Department, and it is administered, and the money's dedicated, 60% of that through PEPFAR. But it's also the CDC. It's a UN AIDS. It's a bunch of other institutions underneath PEPFAR that gets this money for various purposes. And so one of the things to address what the caller in is asking about is that, we talk about suppressing the virus and the herd effect and the immunity, and people really don't understand. They think, well, if I don't get vaccinated, I'll be okay. But the whole issue is if the virus gets a chance to make a copy of itself in anybody, there is a high probability that a virus will come out of that is drug resistant. So it's not that the people who are vaccinated are going to be infected by the common virus they were vaccinated against. It's the people who are unvaccinated that become a breeding colony for new viruses that now everyone will fail in their vaccines. That's what the issue of the herd effect is. So the lives that are saved that you were mentioning versus the ones that are not, this is such an active process, especially in developing nations, where if someone finds out you're going to the AIDS doctor in the village, your children are barred from going to school, or you're arrested, and so it's right now. You have to take your drugs right now, and anything that interrupts that results in you compromised in your health and maybe even dying from the disease. So it's not so much the virus that exists, it's the virus that comes at us from people who have not been vaccinated against the disease. It's a new virus. Yeah.
And I know Tim talked a lot about the global impact, right, and global implications this may have.
It's no longer a community where you can sit in Rochester, enjoy your retirement, and see your kids all being wealthy and having good incomes and happy families. It's a global community, and all of my children wanted to do something internationally involving travel or going someplace else. And let's say they're going somewhere and they get hurt on zip line. They need a blood transfusion. Not all blood supplies are as secure as the Red Cross's blood supply is. Or they need a tissue transplant somewhere else. Or they engage in activities that are high risk when they're in other countries. I remember investors telling me that, why should I care about HIV/AIDS and support your company when I was raising money? I said, no, this is all around you. You just don't have eyes open yet. Your kids will basically be the ones who suffer from your decisions at this point. And so it sounds like, fear mongering, but we've been through the AIDS epidemic. We've just come through the COVID epidemic. This is as real as it gets for people. They have to understand that everyone has to step up and help the scientists and the doctors who are trying to do things, and help the patient activists.
So the whole approach to America First, I understand what they want to do. But with infectious disease, you really just can't do that because, I mean, I was scheduled to go to Uganda to work with some people in February, and there was a Ebola outbreak at the hospital.
Wow.
You know, the viruses of different source, not just HIV, because
Yes.
it's you know,
Measles.
can
Tuberculosis.
be here, and I don't know how you'd prevent it from getting in when it's incubating and there's no symptoms, that sort of thing. And you know, U.S. aid was established because it's much cheaper to proactively take care of people and build friendships and collaborations than it is to have armies, you know, and unstable regimes and that sort of thing. So I really kind of hope the UNAIDS finds a way to get reestablished in some way, whether it's the next administration or whatever.
And what are some immediate impacts? Would it be like a slowdown of vaccine trials, no more trials? What would happen? Some immediate effects when these cuts or if these cuts come into play?
I mean, first of all, South Africa, who's been a great partner of ours in our research, gets no NIH money anymore. So all the trials that were going on there have really been stopped. And there's enough other sites around the world, but there's still a big pushback to anything done internationally. So it's kind of hard to see how we'll make a lot of advances in the future.
Yeah. And for you, Dr. Smith, what would be
Well,
what are the impacts that you're feeling right now?
Immediate
Yeah.
impact is that I have been actively pursuing something that has curative potential. And right now, I can't do the next steps that the FDA would be asking me to do.
And what are the next steps?
The next steps are doing animal studies and making the chemistry and such. It's called, you have to do special synthesis of chemistry to make sure that everything is clean and all that. So to go into a clinical trial, you need to do certain things with your chemistry. You need to show its stability. You need to show that in the formula that someone's going to take, that it's stable and active. And then you have to show safety above all points. And blood levels above all points, and then the effect on the virus at all points. So these studies that are facing me, even before phase 1 clinical trials, are about $2.5 million. Clinical trials would be $3.5 million, and phase 2 about $30 million. That typically comes from federal grants supporting things. It does not come from pharma. Pharma has stepped away from this so bad, it's unbelievable. And they only will take up new ideas after you have cleared and de-risked through phase 2 clinical trials, which is asking an academic from his lab to maybe start a company and raise something in the vicinity of $60 to $70 million to bring this forward. So I've had to lay one person off. I'm looking at selling the HIV right where it is to a foreign nation to get it out of my hands because I can't handle it now. I can't have a dead part of my company because of what the government has said they're going to do. And I would say America First. America First was realized by George Bush with PEPFAR. America First means preemptively protecting American people against all harms, domestic and foreign. And HIV is a global threat, as are other viruses. So I'd say that's right in America First. If you're going to fund anything, fund control of future and current pandemics.
And there's a lot of people that are pissed off with Big Pharma.
Yeah.
Right? And that may say like, well, yeah, they don't need the money. We're pissed at them.
But they have the infrastructure for making the large amounts of chemistry, for putting it into bottles, for the distribution across the world. The commercialization cannot be placed in the hands of an academic working at the U of R Medical Center, nor can it be expected from a biotech whose operating budget is probably as much as $2 million to $5 million. You can't expect us to basically bottling, distributing, salesmen, and everything else. That's pharma. We need them. And when it gets to the large phase 3 clinical trials, which would be $300 million, collecting all those patients and all that doctor participation and all the data analysis is out of control for a small biotech. So we do need pharma, and we need their big pockets to basically carry things forwards. But It's not happening now, and in fact, it didn't even happen during COVID. COVID was a focus on vaccine, and anyone like my company, we can look at the press releases. We were the first company to announce that we had a small molecule anti-COVID drug that was absolutely effective against that virus, working with Fort Detrick. And we could get no traction for that whatsoever. It was not in the game plan. The game plan was going to be vaccine. BARDA was controlling this. Pharma was controlling BARDA, and it just went downstream like that. And so, it went to vaccines, and later on pharma stepped up and did their own thing, and there's now several small molecules on the market for COVID. There's still nothing for Ebola, dengue, yellow fever, Zika, Hunta. All these viruses there's nothing.
Yep. And I know you mentioned, Dr. Smith, the medical field is stressed out right now, But when you're stressed out, there's something you fall back on, right, to keep you going, to keep you doing this work. What keeps you doing this work?
You look for the light at the end of the tunnel and hope that it's not an oncoming train. And that's basically, if anything is my characteristic that has allowed a company, a biotech, to survive for 23 years, it's my intrepidness. I don't understand the word no.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Kiefer, what keeps you doing this work with all this stress and uncertainty?
It's just what I do, and I'll have to deal with the changes. I do want to mention real quickly that there's going to be a 24-hour Zoom / Instagram, Facebook presentation on global AIDS research that really explains what we've tried to scratch the surface of today, and more information on that to come. It hasn't been actually set a date yet, but it can get much deeper into what we've tried to get into today.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for your
appreciate
expertise.
It greatly. Thank you.
Dr. Harold Smith, Dr. Michael Kiefer, both HIV/AIDS research, treatment, prevention experts. Thank you for joining us.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from person-centered housing options working to end homelessness in Monroe County and surrounding communities, hosting a gala to acknowledge a decade of service and outreach Thursday, June 26th from 5 to 8 p.m. at Artisan Works. Tickets online at pcho.org.
Supporting your favorite programs on WXXI TV and radio is just a click away when you go public at WXXI.org. It's a convenient and secure way of supporting an important community resource. WXXI.org. Go public and pledge your support today